Resident Evil 4. Ever since it was released, RE4 को गिना जाता है as not just one of the best games of all time, but also as one of the most influential video games ever made. With its over-the-shoulder cam, balanced use of QTEs and satisfying gunplay, RE4 became a standard for a good third-person action game, जो कि आज भी कई devs के लिए इंस्पिरेशन का सोर्स बने आ रही है। लेकिन भले ही RE4 कितनी ही रेवोल्यूशनरी क्यों ना हो, but I think some of us horror lovers might agree that it somewhat had a negative impact on the genre. धीरे-धीरे कई devs horror game के horror aspects से हट के एक्शन पर ज्यादा फोकस करने लग गए. This, in conjunction with heavy degradation in quality of other horror giants, led to a short dark age of horror games. And इसी एज के बीच आते हैं Glenn Schofield and his talented team at EA Redwood, जिन्होंने ठान लिया था of making one of the most terrifying video games ever made. एक ऐसी game that not only was as fun as RE4, but also something that could make the player feel same level of dread as movies like Event Horizon and Alien. एक ऐसी game that not only could immerse them in its world, but also something that beautifully captures the isolation of space. And finally, after a revision of the name, Dead Space came out in 2008. So, let's grab our plasma cutter, upgrade our armor, refill our rig, and gather some courage, because it's time for us to be whole again.
Above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. When the blazing sun is gone, when the...
So हमारी स्टोरी स्टार्ट होती है इन ईयर 2508, एक ऐसा टाइम जहां पर ह्यूमैनिटी हैज स्टार्टेड टू एक्सप्लोर एंड माइन अदर प्लैनेट्स ड्यू टू द शॉर्टेज ऑफ रिसोर्सेज ऑन अर्थ. इस टास्क के लिए जनरली माइनिंग वेसल्स को यूज करा जाता है, बिगेस्ट ऑफ देम बीइंग USG Ishimura. And it is during one of its many mining operations that the communication with it is lost, जिसकी वजह से USG केलियन की टीम को भेजा जाता है टू इन्वेस्टिगेट द प्रॉब्लम. हमारी केलियन की टीम में कुल 5 मेंबर्स हैं: सिक्योरिटी ऑफिसर जैक हैमंड, कंप्यूटर स्पेशलिस्ट कैंड्रा डैनियल्स, 2 शटल पायलट्स नेमली जॉनस्टन एंड शेन, and of course our main protagonist, an engineer named Isaac Clarke. And as we see in the intro, Isaac का Ishimura पे आने का प्रोफेशनल और पर्सनल रीजन दोनों हैं. As he is not only an engineer, but also उसकी गर्लफ्रेंड निकोल ब्रेनन works as a senior medical officer on the ship. इसके बाद we are finally able to see Ishimura, but as हम शिप पर जा रहे होते हैं, we receive some damage to our ship, जिसकी वजह से landing gets a bit rough. But when we land, something immediately feels out of place with how silent everything is. And after an attempt to take damage report of Ishimura, this happens.
What the hell was that?
Automatic quarantine must have tripped when the filtration system restarted. Everybody relax.
What was that? Did you hear that?
Not sure.
The hell? I don't know. Something's in the room with us.
Jesus! Open fire! Open fire! Get the power! Get up!
Come on. Come on. Got it!
Isaac! Get the hell out of there!
The door's unlocked! Run! Run, Isaac! Get the hell out of there!
From here on out, तुम्हारा ऑब्जेक्टिव एकदम क्लियर है. That is to regroup with your friends. From here on out, तुम्हारा ऑब्जेक्टिव एकदम क्लियर है. That is to regroup with your friends and Nicole and get off of the ship. At the end of the day, Dead Space की story is quite simplistic and basic, but what really makes it work is how it adds up to the game's overall feeling of isolation and dread. You don't really know what these creatures are, how they came to be, and what caused all of this, which helps create cosmic horror. And their grotesque designs are just cherry on the top. Plus, because of how less you interact with friendly NPCs in the game, and there being slight suspicion of each of them having an ulterior motive, it really helps to create a sense of paranoia and isolation. Another great thing about DS's story is that how well it blends with the gameplay rather than constantly interrupting it. अगर हम कुछ exceptions को हटा दें, तो गेम की almost 80% of the story या तो इन गेम ऑडियो या वीडियो लॉग्स या फिर environmental storytelling के थ्रू डिलीवर करी गई है, which further immerses you in the world. This immersion is also enhanced by the fact that Isaac is a silent protagonist जिसकी वजह से you really put yourself in his shoes. बाकी the voice actors also did a great job in presenting that state of panic and even insanity due to all of the things happening aboard. So this wraps up the story side of things. Let's now jump to the cream of the crop, that is the gameplay. So if we are talking about the gameplay, let me tell you, Dead Space is one of the best action horror games out there, sitting right next to RE4 in terms of combat. And while talking about it, Dead Space ka core combat and gameplay loop is quite similar to RE4. You go from place to place, get ambushed by hordes of enemies, and deal with them in such a way that you not only overcome those encounters, but also do it in an effective manner without too much ammo consumption. However, RE4 के comparison में Dead Space जहाँ differ करती है is the way you conserve that ammo. अगर हम RE4 की बात करें तो वहाँ पर melee counter was the key. लेकिन डेड स्पेस में इट्स स्लिम डिस्मेंबरमेंट. श्योर तुम एनिमीज को हेडशॉट्स और बॉडी शॉट्स के थ्रू मार सकते हो, बट नॉट ओनली इट्स मोर अनफन बट आल्सो कंज्यूम्स अ गुड चंक ऑफ एमो. वहीं ऑन द फ्लिप साइड, डिस्मेंबर नॉट ओनली प्रोवाइड्स एन ऑसम विजुअल फीडबैक but is also way more reliable option for ammo conservation. इसके अलावा you also get a stasis module which can help you slow down an enemy, thus making him an easy target. वरना normally they can be really fast. तुम में से कुछ लोगों को लग रहा होगा कि यार अगर कॉम्बैट देखने में ज्यादा डीप नहीं लग रहा तो how it is engaging for about 10 hours. So the simple answer is Dead Space is not about depth. It's about how well the game encourages you to engage with its various mechanics. Game का almost हर एक encounter is well balanced mix of intensity and point-to-point decision making. And to complement this, there are necromorphs who are quite fast and agile, जो कि player को encourage करते हैं to take quick decisions in tough situations. Like कौन सा weapon use करें? Should I aim and fire at cost of mobility? क्या मुझे भागना चाहिए to get some much needed space for shooting? या फिर should I use stasis on the guy or wait for the later use? All of this decision making creates a satisfying gameplay loop of satisfaction for overcoming these encounters. But here, in spite of how fun it is, ये gameplay loop भी एक टाइम के बाद unfun हो जाएगा अगर तगड़ी weapon या फिर enemy variety ना हो. Luckily, DS excels in both of these departments as well. Firstly, let's talk about the enemy variety, which is so good that it encourages the player to use various tactics to get around an enemy encounter. सबसे पहले आते हैं हमारे स्टैंडर्ड स्लैशर जो कि मोस्ट कॉमन है गेम में एंड जनरली चार्जेस एट यू. उसके बाद आते हैं स्पिटर स्लैशर which as the name suggests are similar to slashers but can also spit acid at mid ranges. फिर आते हैं लर्कर्स that can climb up the walls and can fire multiple projectiles in straight line at you. Then नंबर आता है लीपर का who are quite fast, are harder to hit because of their body structure and can leap wall to wall. Next comes swarmers who although are one shot kill but can easily overwhelm you due to large numbers and small size. अगला आता है exploder whose hands can be set to explode at the right time to deal massive area damage. But beware, it can work against you as well. इसके बाद आते हैं pregnants who should be dealt with extreme precision as one shot to the belly and they can give birth to smaller enemy types. लिस्ट में आगे आते हैं guardians who while cannot move but give birth to these ball-like structures which fire projectiles and can also decapitate you when you get close. Then आते हैं infector whose purpose is to create new necros. फिर आते हैं divider who can separate into various small body parts on being killed. इसके बाद आते हैं twitchers who are the fastest enemy in the game. फिर comes wheezers who pollutes the air but are non-hostile. And lastly comes brutes who are mini bosses. And इतने सारे enemies से deal करने के लिए you also get a lot of weapons. And what I really love about most of the weapons in this game is that how they seem more like tools of an engineer rather than actual weapons. And most of them are actually quite useful. सबसे पहले आता है हमारा plasma cutter which is hands down the best weapon in the game and can be used effectively to cut through the limbs. Then है line gun which works very similar to plasma cutter but has comparatively slower fire rate and larger area of damage. Then है ripper which is this game's RNG's favorite and fires a high velocity blade जो कुछ particular time तक active रहेगा. And when being aimed can be a good method for not just conserving ammo but also killing the target. Then comes sports gun which although has less damage but act as a good crowd control weapon जिसका ammo भी स्टोर में बहुत सस्ते में मिलता है. उसके बाद है pulse rifle which is a military assault rifle. अगला नंबर है फ्लेम थ्रोअर का एंड लास्टली कम्स द कॉन्टैक्ट बीम जो कि एक वन शॉट चार्ज वेपन है एंड इज रियली इफेक्टिव अगेंस्ट द ब्रूट. इसके अलावा हर एक वेपन के अपने अल्टरनेट फायर मोड्स हैं जो कि तुम स्पेस बार दबा के एक्टिवेट कर सकते हो. लाइक प्लाज्मा कटर के लिए तुम उसका एक्सेस ऑफ फायर चेंज कर सकते हो एंड लाइन गन के लिए तुम वही डेटोनेटर छोड़ सकते हो एटसेट्रा एटसेट्रा. अब कई लोग जो RE4 के डाई हार्ड फैन हैं उनके मन में वेपन का जिक्र होते ही एक शॉप और अपग्रेड सिस्टम की इमेज बन रही होगी. एंड लकीली DS has got you covered in this regard as well. You see, just like RE4, अगर तुम गेम की कॉम्बैट एंड एक्सप्लोरेशन से इंगेज करोगे तो you will eventually come across credits, जो कि इस गेम की करेंसी है. And with that, you can buy a variety of stuff, from weapons to suit upgrades, ammo, even power nodes. And while speaking of them, Power nodes allow you to upgrade all your major equipments using a workbench, जहाँ पर तुम्हें एक systematic manner में nodes को arrange करना होता है to get your desired upgrades. जहाँ पर weapons के case में you can upgrade stuff like fire rate, capacity, reload speed and damage, तो वहीं पर for suit it's health and air, while for something like stasis it's range and duration. This, in conjunction with the game's shop system, creates an immensely satisfying gameplay loop, where after overcoming all the challenges game has to offer and gathering resources, तुम्हें reward कराया जाता है by allowing you to invest in the stuff that further enhances your stats. However, this progression system would be nothing without its level design complementing it, and I am glad it actually does that beautifully. देखो DS का level design generally इस तरह से काम करता है. You will have 2 to 3 areas to which you can go to, one of them being the main one. But अगर तुम उन side areas को पहले explore करते हो, तो chances are you will either end up with more resources or might even be able to clear a much later area in the game earlier. And just like RE4, it's claustrophobic enough where although you do feel overwhelmed by the hordes, but what you don't feel is unnecessary frustration, thereby further enhancing the feeling of satisfaction that you get after overcoming the challenge. अब ये सब तो ठीक है, लेकिन I really need to mention one of the things that gives this game the reputation it deserves, and that is environmental design. Man, the moment I entered the first 0G area, my mind was blown. I am not kidding जब मैं ये कह रहा हूँ कि there is no game that captures the feeling of being in space better than Dead Space. And the thing I really appreciate about this game is that there is always a touch of groundedness. मतलब तुम्हें ऐसा फील नहीं होगा कि it's only fiction. Rather, ऐसा फील होगा कि भले this is fiction, but it's very much possible. जो कि immersion को next level कर देता है. And speaking of it, इमर्जन इस गेम की गेम प्ले की कोर थीम है, फिर चाहे वो इस गेम की इन गेम UI हो जहां मोस्ट ऑफ द एलिमेंट तुम्हारे सूट में इनबिल्ट है, या फिर द एमो काउंट दैट इज रिटन ऑन योर वेरी वेपन. All of this really helps you to immerse yourself in this game's terrifying atmosphere. Speaking of it, it's finally the time to talk about what I began the video with. That is horror. And man does this game nails it. Now DS का horror generally 3 चीजों के combination से बना है. Those being cosmic horror, jump scares, and fear of being surrounded and overwhelmed. So for the game's cosmic horror, and I have to say, it's pretty good. चाहे वो fear of the unknown हो that comes from the necromorphs since you don't fully understand them, या फिर their grotesque design. As for jump scares, they are the weakest part of this game's horror. But at the same time, game already उन्हें predictable समझ के चलती है by establishing the context of necromorph traversal long before. And yes, भले ही game में बहुत सारे jump scares present है, but they don't take the center stage fortunately. And lastly comes the fear of being surrounded, that comes from being surrounded by a threat that is just as agile and intelligent as you are. Also, this game की lighting and color palette just adds so much to the atmosphere, and as an icing on the cake, the game always keeps you on your toes by messing with your mind. By all of this, it's clear that Dead Space has so much good stuff in it that it is an easy competitor for one of the best games ever made. लेकिन यहाँ पर कुछ issues हैं that prevents it from being best of the best. सबसे पहले let's talk about the game's difficulty balance. Even on highest difficulty, Dead Space feels quite easy, and difficulty के नाम पे गेम बस सिर्फ enemies को और tanky बना देती है. Now ये एक बड़े reason की वजह से problem create करता है. Dead Space is all about engaging in the game's core combat loop of dismembering the creatures, and as a reward, you conserve ammo so you can further invest them in the desired way you want. लेकिन making enemies more tanky means that even when you engage in that loop, you consume more ammo, thus making it so that the player would either have to avoid combat entirely or run out of ammo even when it is not their fault. Also, इस game में stasis के अलावा एक और ability है, that being Kinesis. But other than effective looting and some puzzles, it is mostly useless in combat. Then there are also melee attacks in the form of stomp and punches, but they are mostly useless in combat thanks to the abysmal delay and not so good attack power. फिर आते हैं bosses of the game which honestly weren't all that great and were quite basic, especially when it's compared to its inspiration RE4. And lastly, क्योंकि कुछ weapons and their secondary fire are quite useless. So yeah, that wraps it up for the gameplay. Amazing foundation, but also slight missed potential. You really thought I was going to skip over such an important aspect of the game? Dead Space का sound design is core of this game. It is what adds so much to the atmosphere of the game and make the weapons so fun to use. Especially in the vacuum sections of the game, you really feel like actually being in space. As for soundtrack, it beautifully captures the intensity of the combat and stressful moments. In short, it is fantastic. I loved each and every second of Dead Space. As a horror fan, Dead Space was a great cosmic treat for me, while as a RE4 enjoyer, I loved its gameplay loop. But again, because of some minor problems, it wasn't as great as it should have been. With that out of the way, I give Dead Space an 8.5 out of 10, easily a mini masterpiece and totally worth playing. Go play it now. Abhi ye abhi.